important is it that a guitar has a story?
To me, it's almost everything, really, because we don't make many. We used to make 1,000 a year back in the 1970s. Now we're down to about 100. And that's not because the market's smaller, the market's much bigger. It's partly because of this. Now, I need to be careful here. I'm wearing gloves and a hat because I'm allergic to nearly all these timbers, life-threateningly. So I have to be very, very careful. I've got barrier cream on, etc.
Have you always been allergic?
No, it's happened about 15 years after starting making guitars. That, to me in particular, Indian rosewood, that's the ones I must not touch. I can, if I'm very careful, I can do a little bit, but I'm wearing gloves, so I'll be all right. The guitar trade went through a very bad patch around about 1980. Anybody making guitars really struggled. So did I. So just for fun, really, I started making snooker cues. And I built that business up. But because I was making a lot of cues, I was making thousands of cues, I was looking for timber all the time. I started to use one particular timber, which I didn't know was poisonous. It's the South American rosewood, it's called Santos rosewood. And I got covered in this stuff, and before long, I became allergic to that, and that was a trigger to be allergic to everything else. So I started making more and more snooker cues, and that made me more and more ill. So I sold the snooker cue business eventually and put the money in, reinvested into the guitar business, including large supplies of gloves.
Was it devastating to have an allergy to wood when you work with wood every day?
I would use other words, but yeah. I started off making guitars more for myself and my friends, first of all, and then I helped run a folk club. This is back 1970 or so. And I met the artists, and I made friends with them. They asked me to make them a guitar. That's the way it worked.
And how do you choose somebody to make a guitar for? What's the criteria to have a guitar made by you?
Well, they tend to be recommended to me, and I need to know they play guitar. I don't like making guitars for people that can't play. The first guitar I sold to a professional player was to Gordon Giltrap. This is in 1971, before I became a professional maker. He was playing at my folk club that I was helping to organise, and I went into the dressing room for a while and I showed him a guitar. What do you think of this? He said, lovely, lovely. Where's it come from? I said, I made it. Will you make me one? And that was the conversation, and that's where it started. And that happened with an awful lot of the people that I came to meet, because there wasn't much else going on in guitar making in this country at the time. There were either European or Japanese imports, which some were quite good, really. American guitars, which have always been the things that people aim for, they weren't well known. There weren't many of them. They were brought in by individuals. They weren't imported to shops most of the time. So there weren't many of them. And I was providing an alternative. That's what I was trying to do. I was trying to provide a professional acoustic guitar, and there's nobody else doing it in this country at that time. So the style of the guitar, the physical style of the guitar, probably came first. And then the sound of the guitar followed on. We didn't need a big boomy bass. It wasn't necessary because the thumb was playing a rhythm. You didn't want the rhythm to boom and overpower everything else. You didn't necessarily want a smooth sound of a big chord. You wanted to hear the individual notes. And that became the English sound. And, well, I suppose that was me, which is very nice, thank you. More timber, moving on. This is Suricote, South American timber. Some of the features of Brazilian rosewood, this is what's called landscape grain. Looks like mountains in the background, and then in the foreground, called landscape.
It's amazing.
When that's lacquered up, what they usually do is that. I spat on all the guitars. It shows the grain a bit better. That's Wenge, wenge, an African timber, which is it's a very interesting timber. It's basically an awful lot of tiny splinters that they're lightly glued together. So when you're making a guitar out of wenge, it's a bit unpleasant, but it's a good sound. All right. The rest of the story usually starts just around here. I come downstairs from the woods. This is what you might call tooling. Look at this. It's the shape of a guitar. It's a piece of aluminium which gets hot, so we use that to form the sides of a guitar. This is a little thing for putting a slot in the bridge where the saddle goes. Years ago, when we were making a lot of guitars, I had shelves and shelves full of things like this. Mostly simple jigs for drilling holes in the headstock of a 12-string guitar, Toby, or 8 strings for a mandolin. And that's something I'm pretty good at, is making neck shapes to fit the artist. Done it a lot. Nearly 10,000 guitars now. I know what I'm doing. So this week walked out.
How much do your guitars cost?
This one is about £4,000. That's the standard Goodfellow, which is one of my standard designs, a 12-string version of it. So it's made a bit stronger inside. We don't charge anywhere near as much as some makers do, because we sell direct. We don't go through shops. And also, most of my customers can't afford it. And I want to make them for the players rather than the doctors and dentists or collectors. There's a lot of those around. There are people that charge far more money than me for an inferior product, really, if I'm being honest. You might say, and it happens here all the time, somebody will come and say, this guitar sounds, and I'll go, no, it doesn't. It doesn't sound like that at all. We use different words. And language is a big part of it as well. In America, people use different words to describe the same sound. They'll deny it, but all you've got to do is listen to them to see what happens. They'll say bright or mellow, and I will say the other way around for the same guitars. So I'm trying to dig to the bottom of this. And so at least I've got confidence in what I'm saying, and I don't feel I'm bullshitting people, because an awful lot of this is bullshit. Sorry. I'm always looking at me askance. Taking everything out.
You can't say that on film.
Why not?
Too late.
The part of Toby's music I know most of is his 12-string playing, but he does do other stuff, of course. And Toby's certainly taken the tuning side a long way. People have done it before, but he's taken it a lot more seriously now. He plays a 12-string guitar, which is at least twice as difficult as playing a 6-string guitar, at least, because you have 12 strings to tune, and because you have more strings, if they're not quite in tune with each other, it can sound at least twice as bad. 6 strings are bad enough, but having 12 strings in tune with each other. And then Toby makes it far more complicated, because it doesn't tune the strings the same way as anybody else would do. Whereas a 12-string guitar, that either the 2 strings will be the same note or an octave apart. Toby doesn't do that. It tunes them in fifths or thirds or something weird. So the guitar has to be particularly carefully built so that it actually plays in tune. And then he has to be careful on stage that he does play it in tune. I've not seen him retune a guitar on stage yet. That might be interesting to see.
So this is the guitar. See if it's in tune. Yeah, back in the place where it was made.
It's all part of the fun. It's, if I had to just make guitars, just sand pieces of wood or bend pieces all day, every day, I'd have stopped years ago. But by the time you get after your first few hundred guitars, it starts to get a bit much. And to have a bigger story to it, and to meet the people, makes it much more fun. And then to go and listen to the music being played on something you've made, well, that's the whole bag.
They're not 12 separate strings in a sense, they're octave pairs. So traditionally, a lot of players would play the 12 string in a very similar way to they'd play a 6 string. Gives it a big, expansive sound. So yeah, you can almost get 12 note chords on the instrument, which is kind of amazing. Yeah, this has become the #1 instrument, and like I say, every song on the new record was played on this, and written on this as well.
If you think about a 12-string, because there's 12 strings. The first 2 pairs are in pairs, the second one's an octave apart. And to make it play in tune, the string length is very important. The first 2 pairs are easy enough, but then there has to be, that string has to be a different length to that one, and that one a different length to that one. And when you're playing them together, if it's not right, it sounds pretty awful. So we have to be sure what tuning Toby's going to need and tweak the guitar to suit that tuning, or at least a compromise so you can play. Well, how many different tunings do you use on the guitar?
So these lower strings I keep as octaves, so they don't become different notes. Although I am working on a tuning where I might start doing that.
Oh no!
We'll see.
You might want another guitar. I'm perfectly happy to see a guitar after the initial settling in of say 12 months, because when the seasons have taken its toll, it's been a bit wet, a bit dry, a bit hot, a bit cold. After that's been adjusted, the guitar should really stay fairly stable for quite a number of years. And in this case, I'd say 10. This is Will from State 51. Is that correct? Is that what you think to say?
Absolutely, yeah. So we've been following Roger and Fylde Guitars through his newsletter for some time. And so this sort of plan was hatched to get in touch with Roger and say, can you find us a musician for whom you'd be excited to make a guitar for, and we'll fund it through our record label deal. So Roger gave us a short list, I believe.
We'll offer to give me some money.
Toby, I think, excited us because it was such sort of raw instrumental playing, and we thought that the 12-string could be a really interesting project as well.
I'd only ever had kind of second-hand guitars and things like that. You know, the idea of having a guitar made for me was not on my radar. It wasn't something I was thinking about or thought would happen. So it all happened quite quickly in the end. The actual instrument being built, from being told I was chosen and then meeting Roger and the instrument happening, it all happened very quickly. I like the idea of a bright kind of light front and then a dark back. So you get that contrast between the back and sides and the front. And then I didn't really want too much kind of decoration or anything. The one thing I would like, or I said I'd like, is the red kite, which has kind of become the symbol of Mid Wales, where I'm from.
Normally you'd write an album and presumably want to do the best album you've ever done, but was there more pressure on this one because of the guitar?
Yeah, it was different. There was, I don't really like, it's like a lot of people when they hear their own voice, they don't really like listening to their own voice back. I don't really like listening to myself play guitar back. And so when I've been working on previous records, I can kind of distract myself with the other players and the other people involved. And so you can kind of zoom in on what they're doing and enjoy that rather than worrying about what you're doing. As on this record, there was nowhere to hide, you know, it was just me in a room. So it was very honest, and that was probably the hardest. In some ways, it was the simplest record I've made because I had to just sit down and play, but also the hardest record I've made because there was nowhere to hide. There was no way of distracting me. So it was actually, I made it with my brother. My brother engineered the record, so it was just me and him in the room. And just I was making decisions about what takes to use and things. So it was very, very natural. It was just like at home playing. Just happened to be in this really beautiful space with a beautiful instrument. But yeah, it was hard work for sure.
The challenge of this record was to put you in a situation where you were completely exposed. So it was about the pureness of the purity of the instrument and the playing. So what happens if you take a perfect guitar, put it in a perfect recording context? So we went to Real World and recorded there in the woodroom. So a very natural environment. And what would happen if we threw this incredible guitar into the mix as well? Real World Studios is Peter Gabriel's place in Box. And it's in an old mill. The woodroom is actually, it's a stone room, isn't it? But the floors...
It's got lots of wood in it.
Yeah.
And it's got high ceilings.
Yeah.
So it's a big kind of open space, very natural and acoustic. And
That's what's happening when you're playing an instrument. The room itself becomes part of the sound. It isn't just the guitar. It's being held against your stomach. It's being sat on your knees in the stone wall behind you, the wooden floor underneath you. It's all part of what causes the sound.
So where you're playing instruments is just as important.
And the way you hold your mouth, of course. Every time you buy a new instrument, guitar, violin, piano, it does inspire you to. You hear new things. Even a new set of strings does that as well. But a new instrument, oh wow,
It's true.
I haven't heard that before.
Instruments seem to have music in them, and very often you get this kind of sudden burst of writing when you get the instrument. Yeah, and a lot of these songs on the record came in that initial period where it's kind of it's
time you bought a new one, really, isn't it? So the guitar is never really theirs. It's all still largely mine. It's on sort of semi-permanent. I call it adoption. I don't call it actually buying. It's adopted. It's mine, really.
When did you make your first guitar?
When I was 9,
Why did you make a guitar at 9?
I didn't have one.
How did you make a guitar at 9?
My dad had a workshop. I was interested in guitars. I didn't play. I was just interested. I like making things. So for me, the making came first. The playing came a few years later. I bought a workable guitar when I was about 12. And then the two things started to melt together, making and playing, and started taking both things more and more seriously. So I started off by making, it wasn't a serious guitar. It was made of hardboard and plywood and matchsticks for frets and fishing line for strings. But the idea was there. It was pink with flowers on.
Tell me about some of the people that have bought your guitars. Who would I know?
Who do you know?
Yeah.
The most famous, Sting, Cliff Richard, Seal, Richie Blackmore, Graham Coxon from Blur. I've forgotten the list. My memory is not that good. I spend my time with musicians. I hate spending my time with guitar makers. There's one or two that I get on very well with, but I find it so boring to talk about guitar making all the time. I love talking about music and making things. It's universal. Anybody that works with wood comes to love it. Quite apart from the trade that you're doing, quite apart from the things you're making with it, because it's such a wonderful, it's almost human, it has this nature to it. Not always a pleasant nature. So, you're making it an item worth thousands of pounds and working with very, very delicate, very, very expensive timber, and all of a sudden something goes wrong and you can't fit it right, you can't bend it back, you can't weld another piece on. So it has this nature to it. You have to be very careful, which of course makes it very attractive, but also scary and a bit unattractive, really. When you're working with this sort of thing, sometimes you have to turn the phone off and lock the door because you cannot have any distractions.